What's up, my brothers and sisters? Welcome to the Fireground Fitness Podcast, where we talk about all things pertaining to life on and off the fireground. The views and the opinions expressed here are those of your host and our guest. Today, we sit down with Fire Battalion Chief Chris Sleigher and talk about professionalism and the need to challenge the current paradigm. It's a great conversation. Give it a listen and enjoy. So, Chris, thank you, man, for coming and sitting down and taking some time to rap with us. I say us, me and the 10 listeners. No, really appreciate your time. And so I want to talk about Fire Nuggets, and I want to talk about what you're doing in that training space. And I want to talk. We had a kind of a little preamble here before we hit record, and I want to talk about some of those things. So we'll dive in and talk about some of the changes in the fire service. And frankly, what I would love to talk about is how resistant we are to change, and why we're resistant to change, what that looks like, and why change is so important in the fire service. Because we touched on some of these ideas that people consider super extreme, and they're not extreme. They're just challenging the way our current operational paradigm. And it's important that we lean into those things and visit it. Anyway.
Correct.
And so before we dive into that, why don't you give us an introduction? Who are you?
All right. So I'm Chris Sleigher. I am currently a battalion chief with the City of Mesa. I've been solely with the City of Mesa my entire career, which is coming up on 27 years. I retire in 9 months, and that's nice. With my drop extension. For 17 years before that, I was captain. It is funny because I've got my daughter when she was 3 years old holding my helmet, my captain's helmet, when I got promoted.
That's awesome.
And then when she was 20 years old, visited me at the station where I promoted the BC. So wearing the same brush pants, holding the BC helmet. So I spent a lot of time as a company officer. It was probably one of my favorite spots. But before that, I was firefighter, engineer, been part of the honor guard, the bike team, helped plan special events. So I've been involved with the fire department a lot.
Yeah. What did you do before you got on the job?
So I worked at a company called Popular Outdoor Outfitters. And I ended up, I was a pretty avid mountaineer and rock climber back then. And, I was all over the Mexican volcanoes. I climbed Rainier several times, did the 100-mile loop around Rainier.
The Circumference Trail?
Yeah, the Wonderland Trail. Yeah. So it was fantastic. Climbed Mount Hood, Baker, St. Helens. Back then I did a 8,000 meter challenge, which was the 3 highest mountains in Southern California in X amount of hours. So, but if you didn't make the last one, which is San Gorgonio, you had to sleep on the mountain because it's a tram that takes you up there. So you did Mount Baldy.
Oh wait, is that down in outside of Palm Springs?
Outside of Palm Springs, yeah.
Yes.
So we started at Baldy.
Hold on. I'm going to geek out on here.
Yeah, go.
What's the approach on that?
So that one, you take the tram up, and then you hit the trailhead for the summit.
Isn't that cheating?
So there's no other approach up to that point.
So when I've driven past that on the I-10, when you look at the north-facing slope of that mountain, this is from, however many miles away, 10, 15 miles away. But I'm pretty sure there's a line that you can take up that slope.
There might be. It's steep. But we start at early in the morning. We camp out at Mount Baldy beforehand. We do a big carb dinner, and we take off Mount Baldy, and then we drive to Gorgonio. We hit Gorgonio, and then we hit San Jacinto, which is that mountain there, which are the 3 highest peaks. Put you over 8,000 meters. But Jacinto has the tram. So if you don't catch the last tram down, you're stuck.
Yeah.
So you're sleeping on the mountain. And then in the morning, you get the guys that didn't quite make it, and then you do a big, celebratory breakfast, and they all give you the swag and stuff. So I used to be heavy into mountaineering, technical rescue. Before I went to college, I wanted to be a cop. So, and that's how I got into the fire service, really, is I really wanted to be a police officer. I was a pretty avid mountaineer and rock climber, so I ended up volunteering with the sheriff's department for their CAMRA, Central Arizona Mountain Rescue Team.
Oh, cool. So
I did that for a lot of years, where I met a gentleman named Tom Penley, a guy you may know, Mike Planetta, and they're like, hey, if you go to the fire department, we get paid for this technical rescue. You don't have to volunteer. Cops are cops. I was like, well, that sounds way better. So in, let's see, I got hired in January 11th, 1999. And so I tested for Mesa Fire and Phoenix Fire first. And at the time, Mesa Fire was Scantron. So I walked out of the test and I had my results. And they literally scheduled me for my physical agility that day before I left. So a week later, I was doing my physical agility and passed that. And when I left, they said, here's your interview date. And I was through Mesa's process in a month. And in the academy, before I even got a letter from Phoenix saying,
oh my gosh,
hey, come take our physical agility, I'm like, hey, Mike, what do I do? Mike Planetta, and he's all, just stay in Mesa, man. That's a good department. So I stayed, and I've been there ever since. But,
nice.
Yeah, that was kind of that journey. So, and early in my career, that's what I wanted to do. Technical rescue. I wanted to stay in that. I was still rock climbing all the time, mountaineering. And so I was heavy in mountain rescue. I worked with Pat Rhodes, for a long time. We traveled the country doing technical rescue stuff. And I felt like I was at the top of my game. And then once I had my second kid, I was like, oh, I need to slow down. So, but back then we were doing, Phoenix regional training for hazmat and TRT. We were dual tech. It was 2001, so we were running a lot of hazmat calls right after 9/11. And we were just, if we weren't training, it was a weekend, so we were training and doing stuff all the time. Once I had my youngest daughter, Blake, she's 13 now. But I slowed down and went to Engine 10, slowed down a couple of years, and then started getting into fire behavior stuff. And then that's a whole different conversation we can we can lead into. Yeah. So
that's awesome, man. So it's funny. I feel like you and I had a little bit of a parallel track. So it would have been I'm guessing in the early 90s when you were out doing all that climbing.
Yeah.
I started climbing when I was in the Marine Corps, stationed in 29 Palms. So we were out in J-Tree every day.
Love it.
Right? Because it was right off base, the back entrance into J-Tree. So we were out there nonstop, my wife and I, just climbing up a storm out there. And never got into any alpine. It was something I aspired toward, but never really got to. That's super cool. How did you get into the alpine side of climbing?
That had a lot to do, I think, with Tom Penley as well. Him and I, we did Rainier several times together.
Cool.
And then rock climbing, all the time with Troy Passmore, who used to work for Glendale Fire, Al Escobar. Those were my climbing buddies back in the day.
Yeah.
But, and then once you get into that fold, like anything else, you meet people and they're like, hey, you want to go do X? And I'm like, yeah.
That's cool.
So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, I love climbing. I miss it. I stopped climbing kind of when we moved out here, and it's so damn hot, and the climbing, there's not a lot of close climbing in the valley here. So you got to travel a little bit to get there. And I was like, meh. And so I stopped climbing, and then over the years, I miss it.
Yeah,
I miss it a little bit. Yeah. Do you ever climb anymore?
Rarely. If I do, I take the kids. We do something easy. We'll top rope something or go to the rock gym. It's been a long time. I'm like, man, I got to get rid of this lead rack. I hardly ever use it anymore. It's just taking up space now.
Yeah.
Same with my mountaineering stuff. But it was definitely a good part of my life. And actually, I use it as a parallel. When we were talking about networks on the weekly scrap with Corley Moore. I felt like at some point I was surrounded by some of the best mountaineers in the world. I was on a rope team with Lou Whitaker, and his son Peter Whitaker, and a guy named Robert Link, who led the Russian expedition up Everest, and Noang Gambu, who was the first Sherpa to summit Everest twice. And I'm their next guy on the rope team.
Yeah, every team has its weak link.
Seriously, yeah. And all I did, we're sitting at Ingram Glacier, and I'm just taking all the stories in.
That's awesome.
Where can you get that? And then later on in the fire service, when I started getting involved with Fire Nuggets and operating that, I feel like I was surrounded by some of the best, most motivated firefighters in the world. Not just local, but guys from Sweden and Ecuador, and just learned so much. It was super cool. But
well, so okay, let me ask you a question. So I really love this idea that you talk about the network and people. And what comes to my mind is the power of relationships.
So profound.
So let me just dive right into some deep shit. How do you foster healthy relationships? Like, how do you do that? You think about a young firefighter coming on the job. They don't have that network. They don't have those people in their lives. How do you get that? How do you develop it?
I don't think it's that hard. I just keep in touch with people. We have common interest already, and we support each other. And if you genuinely care about the direction the fire service is going, you meet like-minded people, like Ashley, who had just had our coffee with. You meet like-minded people through your career, and you just network and foster those relationships. And all the time, I'll text you just out of the blue. Hey, how you doing? I'm just thinking about you today.
Yeah.
What's going on in your life? Is there anything I can do for you? Type of thing. And I try to keep that up regardless of the person. There's a guy that gives me all of my standpipe valves from Zurn. I text him on the regulator. Hey, just checking in on you. He's not part of the fire service. He's just, a connection that we've developed the friendship over the years, and we just foster that by keeping in touch for really no reason other than enjoying conversation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think it's important to recognize the vast network that exists here, right? It's a small system, frankly, an ecosystem, right? The fire service, we call, right? Particularly in the United States, right?
Everybody's brother.
Everybody knows each other.
Yeah.
Right? There's these people who know each other all the way around the horn. So if you need something, but you have to make it clear and ask and say, hey, I'm trying to find information on X. And usually somebody knows somebody who has that information. So it's about connecting those dots. And I think you have to be deliberate about it. Kind of you talk about checking in on people and making sure that you're helping those relationships stay healthy. Right. I think that's a big part of it. And then I think the other piece of that is asking for engagement, right? If you just sit in the station and never get outside your circle, how are you going to build a relationship? So I think it starts with, you're this young firefighter and you start with your crew, you build relationships, you get to know who they know, and you start finding out and you just start getting involved and asking questions and, putting your hand up and volunteering for different things and then getting to know different people and expanding that network.
For sure. And you got to listen and listen, with intent. I heard a quote a long time ago. It says, most people listen with the intent to respond, not the intent to understand. And I was like, man, that's true. And I kind of took that and I was like, I need to be better at that myself. So now I'm more of an active listener with my family and in the fire service. What do you need? And then once I understand what you need or what you're asking or what that is, then I can respond intelligently and try to make those relationships better.
So when you talk about being an active listener, so what's I think that's really important. And I'm curious how you do it.
Well, I think, I don't know if there are many people that disagree with me, but, I've got experience, and I got experience through good judgment, and I got good judgment through poor judgment, right? So
okay, I hear you.
Right.
So in other words, your wife would not agree that you're not a good listener.
She got mad at me the other day. I was like, "Honey, you're a great manager, but you're a terrible leader." I was like, "There's a difference," and she was like, "What?" Yeah. And so when we broke it down. She understood. She's like, man, you can't tell people that. But yeah, now I try to I make a point of saying, hey, because the response is already in my head. When I start listening, the response is there. So I need to make myself better by consciously going, hey, let them finish, and then we'll respond.
Right.
So
to your point, that let them finish piece is one of the things I think about with active listening is trying to be as deliberate and present in that conversation, right? And we talk about building relationships, right? Making the other person feel heard is an important part of that conversation, right? If you want someone to trust you, you want to build a relationship, they need to feel like you're truly paying attention.
Right.
So the tool that comes to my mind, this is why I asked you, because I think there's different ways of looking at this. the active listening to me is kind of demonstrating that I'm listening. So if you would to say something, I would echo back a little bit, like I would repeat maybe the or rephrase or repeat back what you said to me, and so that you can track that I'm listening to you, right?
Correct.
Or even if someone is going on and on, I've done this with my wife a few times because she's a talker, storyteller. So she's in the middle of a thing and I'm like, hold on. I want to make sure I'm keeping up with you. What I heard you say was dot, 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 dot. Am I keeping up?
Right.
And she's like, yeah, that's exactly right. And I go, okay, carry on.
Yeah.
Right. And so, because what I have a tendency to do is she gets into the deep part of her story and I reach for my phone. And next thing you know, I'm scrolling on my phone and she's like, what the hell's happening? And I go, I'm listening. She's like, you're not listening.
No, you're hearing her, but you're not listening. Right.
I am certainly not comprehending because I turn my brain somewhere completely off. And this whole idea that we can multitask is an absolute bullshit. So I think that there's these tools, and I think it's really important to understand how to use them to be able to build great relationships and communicate with people.
Well, you said the key word that I think is one of the most important in the fire service is trust. Mm-hmm. And when that trust is works both ways. When you're an incident commander or senior firefighter or all the way down the chain, you have to trust the person, your peer, the person below you, and the person above you. If that doesn't work, you've got chaos on the fire ground, right? Which is chief has arrived on scene typically, right? But so that trust has to be between you and your company officers or the command staff and in general. Yeah. But active listening plays a part of that. And once you understand what they're saying, then you can answer with intent.
Yeah. So how do we build trust? So active listening is part of that, right? It's super important. How do we develop it?
In the fire service particularly, I build trust by empowering. I go out and I like to operate. I give intent. That's how I lead. I lead with intent. Here's the objective that I would like you to achieve. Yeah. Right? You can do it 100 different ways. I might provide you a better one, but I'm going to give you the autonomy and permission to screw up. Right? So here's the objective. Here's what I want to accomplish. And then we build the trust through training and sweat equity and communication. Yeah. Right. That's how we do it.
I like that. I think it's important. I like what you're saying about leaders' intent, right? And then giving people the room to work, right? I think there's a famous Bruno quote. Hire good people, train them, give them the tools, and get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
Right? Yep. So that's it. Here, you are empowered to be a good steward of this organization. You're empowered to do the right thing for Mrs. Smith, right? And then when they fail to do that, you come in, provide course correction, and get them back on track.
Sure.
Because I don't think any of us come to the table with malintent.
No.
Right?
No, not at all.
Yeah. So trust is built in. So how do you build? So let's talk about small unit leadership for a second. You captain for 17 years with an engine company. You get a brand new firefighter. How do you build trust with that new member of your crew?
I got to drill with them all the time. Yeah. One of your questions was, what's non-negotiable for you as a company officer, I think. And that's just training. Hoses came off my truck every day. We drilled every day. We had conversations every day. When we ran a med call, we didn't necessarily pull a hose, but I went to Harbor Freight and got one of those wheels. I said, hey, how long of a stretch do you think it is from the rig to here? And I'll bet you a soda that I'm closer than you, or ice cream, right? And we'll take the wheel and estimate the stretch.
I like it.
We never miss an opportunity to you don't have to run the play, but you definitely have to talk about the play all the time.
Yeah.
And when you do that, your expectations are established. I don't sit down and tell them a hard list of expectations. Mine back in the day was we're going to have fun. We're going to go home safe. If you have to make a decision, make it. If you make a bad one, we'll talk about it. But don't fail to make that decision. I'm empowering you to be a thinking firefighter. And now my job is to give you the tools to do that, right? I want you to step off the rig, and I want you to know why you're pulling this 1 3/4 hose line versus this 2-inch or the 2.5. Why are you doing that? Because we're really good at developing habits. And most people I talk to don't know what GPM their nozzle flows, or they'll just give me a blanket answer 150. Well, it does more than that. So give me the parameters. When do you want this versus this? When do you want a smooth bore or a fog? Can you hydraulically ventilate with both of these? What are the pros and cons between this? And what's your weapon selection on your truck? And, it goes way past that. It goes how we're specing our engines, how we spec our turnouts. We can get into all of that and the response for Mrs. Smith and what we do great and what we do poorly. But once I give my firefighters the expectations and, hey, I don't make you clean. And back when I was a captain, I didn't make my firefighters clean for the first month. So the first 10 days he was at my station, basically, he didn't clean anything or she didn't clean anything. I did that with the senior firefighter to show him that we're not above it. And I said, I need you to go look at that fire truck and tell me everything that's in that compartment. If you have a question, you can ask the senior firefighter, and he or she will answer that for you. And when that takes place, cleaning a toilet doesn't make you a better firefighter.
Yeah.
Right. So now it'll make you better in the future, but right now I need you to be a firefighter. And when you step off the rig, I need you to understand why we're going to pull this one, this 1 3/4 inch that can put out X amount of fire. And I can get into, hey, I want you to write me a paragraph on the Royer Nelson flow formula versus the NFPA flow formula. And then we're going to get into specifics why and how much square footage this nozzle can put out. Because now you're making a choice. It's not a habit.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a badass pallet firefighter, buddy. You can put any number of pallets in front of me in the burn room and a room that doesn't burn, and I got you. But when it comes to a structure, I want you to know why you're pulling it. I want you to identify if it's a bidirectional or unidirectional flow path, what the hazards are involved with that, and why you're pulling the weapon that you did.
Yeah. So what I hear and what you're talking about there, see, active listening. Here's an example. What I heard in what you were saying is we build trust as we set expectations, and then the person demonstrates their fidelity to those expectations, right? They are learning the job. They're coming to you with questions. They're working through the challenges. They're showing up with performance. Whether taking they're writing you a paper about the differences between the different hose evolutions or what have you. And that is how they're building trust as that young firefighter. And you are, they're gaining trust in you because you're saying, hey, I'm investing in you. I'm going to give you course correction. I'm going to give you course correction in a kind, encouraging, and nurturing way to build you up and get you where you need to be successful. I'm going to go clean the shitter, right? While you do this work to become better.
Right.
And, this leads into something we were talking about kind of before we hit record, which was this idea of the fidelity of the work that we do and what it means to be a professional firefighter and how do we show up in a professional way. And you just gave a really, really good example. So when you think about that more globally, now that you're out of the firehouse, you're a chief officer now, right? When you think about professionalism, what does that look like to you?
There's so many different definitions of that, right? There's professional on med calls and representing your organization. My friend Chris Bloom wrote an article called Branding in the Fire Service. And he says, like the Nike swish or the Apple symbol are trusted brands. The Maltese Cross is the most trusted brand in the United States, if not the world, right? And, we could go into a grocery store and talk to, a mom or dad or a little kid and say, hey, you want to come out and see my truck? Right. And you try that in your civilian closure, you're probably going to get maced. So, it's not you, it's the uniform, it's the Maltese Cross and the trust, right, that we've built, the professionalism that developed over the years. Professional on the fire ground, it starts a little bit in our academies, but I think it's our company officers that need to develop our younger members and empower, give more emphasis on the senior man, right? The senior firefighter. So empower them to make some decisions and teach, and you can give guidance along the way, but that's where the professionalism starts. And, there's a couple things that I don't know if we're good at or not, but a different way that I've looked at it, I said, you can be stressed or you can be learning, but you can't be both, right?
Yeah,
and there's a difference between proficiency and efficiency. So if you're proficient at something, the old adage, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? But once you develop the muscle memory and the proficiency, then slow is just slow. Right? You've got to put a clock to it to be efficient.
Yeah.
And then you take that skill set and move it into a much quicker, more active thinking environment. And I'll talk about that video that we just posted on my ladder crew, 206, where they had that 35-foot ladder stand and a vertical vent hole cut ready to push through in sub 3 minutes. You know what I mean? That's efficient. They are doing purposeful movement, purposeful communication, and that comes through training and being proficient at your skills first.
Yeah.
Right. So, I go help people all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
stuff like that.
I would say to me that is the mark of professionalism.
For sure.
Right. So as you build the skill set and your ability to execute efficiently, that's being a pro. Right. And knowing why you're doing what you're doing on the fireground.
Why is huge.
That's professionalism. Right. If you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it and where you're doing it, that all comes together. Those are the decisions you have to make on the fireground to be a pro. If you're just doing something because that's how your organization has always done it, and you don't understand why you're doing it.
Yep. Most dangerous phrase in the United States Fire Service is that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
Right. That's the most dangerous phrase in the American Fire Service.
Yeah, that's a problem. So I want to talk about that for a second, because that phrase to me, when we talk about how we've always done it, to me, that is a setup for failure, because operational context has evolved and is always evolving. Always. And as much as we all poo-poo EMS, right? The reality is that in the world of medicine, they're constantly using a phrase I call evidence-based practice. They are looking at the evidence, the data. Is this working for us? No, more people are dying when we intubate this way or versus this way. We can use LMAs or King Airways or whatever. That's a nod to my paramedics over there. See, and we'll save more lives because we'll establish a more deficient airway, blah, blah, blah. And so they make the change.
Right.
And so we changed that. But in the fire service, we're so hung up on the way we've always done it that we're not willing to consider what changes would be. That's the sound of freedom, folks.
Yes, it is.
I think you can hear it. I don't know for sure, but
F-35s
flying by.
I love it.
So we need to be willing to get curious and to be open-minded to data, to evidence, to learned experiences, right? And coalesce those things into some changes. And I bring it up with you in particular because I know you are a free thinker, and you've come to the table with a few ideas.
That's a nice way to put it.
I'm trying to be as kind as possible. So you've come to the table with some ideas, and people are like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!"
Right?
Too
aggressive. I'm too aggressive. I'll use that term, right?
There you go.
Because I get that you're aggressive. My organization doesn't want me to be in the deputy position because I work too closely with some people that think maybe I'm too aggressive. And aggressive, is not bad. So aggressive is not reckless, right? Okay. Aggressive is aggressively lowering your risk management plan on the fire. Aggressive is a culture of suppression, by definition, making it safer for the civilians and the firefighters on scene, right? Aggressive is rapidly achieving my tactical objectives to make that incident management plan better, right? That's aggressive to me. It's not reckless. But risk is managed by competence. And when you have people that say, hey, we don't ever VES, we're always going to lay in a water supply, to make those blanket statements just tells me that your organization or that chief officer or company officer isn't proficient at that skill set, may not have a complete understanding of where we're operating on the fire ground, and they probably need to get out and train. I'll use the term inbred, but we do a lot of really good things in the Valley, better than most in a lot of places. And I can get into so many things we do great. But the thing that we can improve on is we're inbred. And we do a lot of train the trainer. And I teach at a lot of fire conferences. I attend most of them. And I rarely see anybody from the Valley at these conferences. And when I do, they're the 1%ers. You know what I mean? They're the dudes that want to make change in their respective organizations, and they're all over. They got some from Phoenix and some from Glendale, some from Gilbert, but I don't see many of them, and I don't see them in the right classes. I'm like, you already know this. You need to, comfort is the enemy of growth. You need to go over and pay attention to this dude talking about EV fires underground in high rise. You need to talk about vertical terrorism. In Tempe, I don't even know if they're looking at that. We go into high rise. Does
that have something to do with like price gouging and rent increases?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. So, and in Tempe, they're building up right now. Big time. But have you ever talked about high rise under construction? Right? Have you talked about curtain walls and how those are up there? And are we going to take these elevators? The standpipe system doesn't exist. The lobby doesn't exist as we know it. Are we talking about this? Because right now we are a mecca of mid-rise and high-rise.
Yeah.
And we're not even looking at it. We don't have a fundamental understanding of some of this. And when I mentioned podium and wrap mid-rise stuff and how those are considered two different structures in a podium, and are this fire retardant wood or not, I get looks like deer in the headlights, right? And, when I talk about the NFPA standards and International Building Code and how that's passing us up, and we don't have a seat at the table, deer in the headlights, right? So if you can't walk into these environments as a chief officer, or your organization isn't supporting you to get out and learn, well, shame on you, right? Of course you're going to think I'm aggressive. So
yeah, you just called us inbred.
Yeah, right. Because we are not outside learning these different things. And there are some things that you absolutely aren't going to take, right? Like that are not going to fit our organization, not going to fit our risk management plan or our response model. There's just some things that aren't going to work for us. And that's okay. Discard that and pick up the information and utilize that information in a way that's going to fit your organization.
So a couple things that you touched on I really want to pull a thread on. So I love, I was talking about the whole, when you mentioned inbred, I've kind of laughed at myself because I'm like, well, that comes across pretty harsh, right? But the reality is we're, I had a good friend of mine said this the other day, we're the only ones with a giant foam finger sitting here going, we're number one. Nobody else is saying that, right? It's just us.
Yeah.
And why do we do that? Well, because we love what we do and we think we're great. And by and large we are. And there's not a single fire burning unchecked in the Valley, right, at this time.
Yeah.
So all the fires go out.
Yep.
So that's a mark of success. But the reality is, like you said, you talk about high rises and mid rises and all these things that are changing. And we need to be looking over the fence at who else is doing this and get outside of our own neighborhood, if you will, right? And find other dance partners.
Yes,
because there's a lot of learning that we can do. And the example that comes to me in my head is in 2016, I was assigned to the CTC in Phoenix, and my boss comes to me and says, "Hey, we need to look at fire dynamics." I was like, "What's that?"
Right.
Okay. And I'm like, "Okay, let's look at it." And I start doing some research, and I realized that LA County, LA City, FDNY had been already studying.
Done it.
Yeah, they've been studying it for 10 or 12, 15 years at that point.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, how could we be so far behind the power curve?
Yep. So in 2014, I started doing some Mayday stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was at a task level because we're very good at the command structure. It's always evolving, but the task level stuff, we did a bunch of drills with Gilbert, back in 2002 after the Tarver incident, which is the anniversary is today. We collectively in the Valley did 232 drills or something like that. We all got to walk the supermarket after the event. We were very transparent of what happened. Well, we did some drills after that where my crew was more efficient by minutes removing firefighters. And that came down to purposeful movement and purposeful communication. And so we got Fire Crew of the Year for that. And then for that, I started looking into some stuff. And it was the weekend firefighter back then, before UL was what it is now as we know it. But right around that time frame, Derek Alconis and Steve Kerber had the weekend firefighter. So myself and Tom Penley were talking about that before he retired. And I started reading a lot about heat release rate and flow path. And I came up with another presentation after we did this Mayday stuff, and I called it Preventing the Mayday. And it was all just flow path. So Mesa implemented all that flow path stuff back in about 2015 or 16, right? We started talking about transitional attack. We started talking about, bidirectional, unidirectional flow path. I mentioned it on radio traffic in several fires, back then. I said, hey, I've got a bidirectional flow path from the front door to the Arcadia door. And my chief at the time said, well, I don't need to know that. I'm like, yes, you do, but you might not know it yet, right? Because that's pertinent information for you. Yeah. Especially when you dig into some of these line of duty deaths that are attributed to unidirectional flow paths. But to get my firefighters to identify that and the captains on size up, that's huge, right? So we started that journey, a long time ago. But to your point, it's been an interesting journey.
Well, what's beautiful about that, right, is when we look over at we look up and out and go, hey, what's going on in the fire service around us? I think it's an important mindset to have. We have to be looking at what is changing around us. And that's the thing about the fire dynamics that's so interesting, is the operational context in the fire ground has evolved. The contents, the fire load, the shape of structures, the shape of land, the way we're building houses, all those things are affecting the way fires are burning.
Sure. Which
affects rescue profile, which affects whether or not, when we make decisions about when to start putting water on the fire, it impacts when we should be laying supply lines or not, right? Which is the other big, the big thing, the big flag you threw up that got everyone all wrapped around the axle.
Right.
And so let's talk about that for a second, right? So what do you think was the biggest pushback that you got when it came? Well, hold on. Let's talk about what the idea was. Your premise was, and I'm going to say it and you tell me if I'm right or wrong. Your premise was, you don't need to lay supply on every single fire because you have at least 500 gallons with you, period.
Yeah. And honestly, I bet you if you pull your radio traffic and on-scene reports, your guys aren't laying in. You know what I mean? We got our blinders on. So I know in Mesa, we hardly ever lay in for the first unit. So I won't tell my guys when to prioritize or deprioritize a supply line, right? There are times where you need to prioritize a supply line. It's not very often in our system because you can't get an on-scene report out without somebody being right behind you chomping at the bit, right? So
what I hear what you're saying, for me, what I hear you saying is your operational context matters. Your deployment matters.
Yes.
Okay, carry on.
So when I talk about that, if you don't want me to use tank water, stop putting water on my fire trucks. I'll save a lot of wear and tear, right? But man, I'll save gas. I'll save brakes. If you're going to make me lay a supply line on every single fire, don't put water on them. But when I tell you that sounds ludicrous, right?
Yes.
But I should be able to operate off that, and attack lines need to hit the ground before supply lines. That's just the way that needs to operate. We come with water. We need to use that water. And we need to get it out of our head that it's not okay to run that first apparatus out of water. Because if we can make that knockdown and put this fire back into an incipient phase to where it has to regrow, well, guess what? I got 500 gallons right behind it that I can make a key pumper, right? But the problem is we're not thinking outside the box. So now it's like laying a supply line to me. Well, okay, now I have 500 gallons sitting here, and that truck's not doing any good. So why can't I make that a key pumper and then pony up to my original pumper? Right. So, and then there's no delay in fire attack. I've got knockdown. I've got, and search and suppression efforts. Right. So I use, there's basic laws of the fire ground that I said before, right? You as an incident commander, you need to take care of your people. And that is bring home everyone and everything you came with. And you want to make an impact to protect Mrs. Smith and their families at all costs, right? And if I put your kids in a box, I won't say your wife because half the guys will be like, leave her in the box, right? So if I put your kids in a box.
And my guns.
Yeah. And started filling that box with smoke.
Yeah.
What do your kids want more than anything in the world? Out of the box.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're going to stop down the street and lay a supply line at X amount of miles per hour down, and I'm going to come up and make a difference and open the box, and you're going to wait another 45 seconds or more, you need to make that difference. We need to make that a priority on the fire ground. And if you dig into all of the UL studies, with flow and hand lines, we're extinguishing 2 bedrooms of fire beyond the growth phase into fully developed into rollover with 257 gallons of water, right? This is not a volume problem. It's an application problem. And so when we identify from the get-go, where are we speccing our engines, right? So we talk about clean cab and stuff, but everything we're doing is slowing down the response for Mrs. Smith. If my hose beds are too high and I got to pull a shelf, seconds away from Mrs. Smith. If I got to still throw my pack from the exterior because I can't mask up inside the cab because I'm going to be fogged up when I get out, depending on the time of year, seconds away from Mrs. Smith, right? So when we're talking about the impact period that we need to make and all of our suppression efforts need to support a search, then we need to start those suppression efforts right away. Remove the thermal insult, remove the toxic gas, and you create that environment through coordinated fire attack and water. Because once you apply that water, you get lift and you get gas contraction, right? Creating more of a space that we can search, right? I use the term searchable space, not survivable space, because searchable is up to us, right? It's in our volume too. In fact, I think it says something like, the incident commander shall direct a primary search into all, and all is underlined, involved and exposed occupancies that can be entered within our risk management plan, right? And it says shall. That tells me I will search it, right?
Yeah.
And so deprioritizing the water supply, I think is huge. And to go back to that.
So what is the pushback that you've received?
A lot, they don't have a really valid point a lot of the time. Well, what if the hydrant's broke? Well, more of a reason not to lay a water supply.
Yeah.
Right? So, because I'm going to get much faster water if the hydrant doesn't do it. What if you're going to run out of water? That's okay. The second in units on scene before you got a on scene report out, guess what? They're the primary pumper. They can pull hose lines off, and we can make a more assertive attack, intelligently aggressive attack.
Yeah.
Now, I asked my captains, I said, look, again, I'm not going to tell you when to prioritize and deprioritize, but I will ask you to take this into consideration. If your crew can get out of the truck, clean cab, throw their pack, mask up. We don't teach masking up with your gloves on. So again, seconds away from Mrs. Smith, right? So if you can mask up, pull your 150 to 200 foot attack line to the front door, charge it, do your AVP, check your air volume pattern. You're flowing it for at least 10 seconds, right? Because water should travel through your hose at 22 feet per second, right? So you're going to clear that debris, and you want to know that before you go interior. If you can do that and get interior to the seat of the fire through a smoky environment and dump all 500 gallons before your next unit's on scene, by all means, you should consider a supply line. But when you have a 3 to 4 minute reflex time, and I don't know what your minimum company standards are, but you have that timeline. If your second in unit is not on scene in that 3 minutes or whatever that minimum company standard is, consider a supply line. But if not, you just delayed that fire attack and you did Mrs. Smith a disservice.
Yeah. So I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think that the it's interesting to hear the pushback. What I hear in that for me is a little bit of resistance to change, a little bit of resistance to common sense, and the application of size up and how important that is, right? Where is our second truck coming from? How
Correct.
far behind us are they? How big is the structure we're going into? What's the volume of fire, right? Because a simple single room bedroom fire, for example, is going to go out very fast.
Very fast.
Right?
Right.
Now, if you have floor to ceiling, front to back, wall to wall fire, you're going to need a little bit more water, right? So size up matters, and the risk profile matters, right? Where are your people at?
Right.
All those things go into it. So and then you talked about water application and using your tools correctly, and it goes back to understanding the job that you're trying to do, right? And the tools that you're bringing to execute that job.
And the way your department supports you. I look back years ago, there was a condominium fire in Peoria. You probably remember it. There's 3 victims in that fire, right?
Yep.
The captain in there.
You talking about the kids trapped in the bathroom?
Yep. And I think it was John Alley, and I don't know him. I just watched the review that Penley put on. He pulls up, and they've got heavy involvement, and they've got an awning there, and it looked like, I was told that his first reaction was going to be deck gun this, right? And I look at it like this, when I talk about weapon selection, you got a PW can that's 2.5 gallons, right? Your 1 3/4 hand line is 2.5 gallons a second. So it's 1 PW can every second. Your 2.5, your 2.5 inch hose line is 5 gallons a second. So it's 2 PW cans a second. Your deck gun should be 100 GPM. So again, it's just exponential, right? So you roll up and you think deck gun, right? I'm going to blast this fire, but this awning's in the way. I'm thinking 10 gallons a second, right? And you go, nah, never mind. I'm going to pull an 1 3/4, which is 2.5 gallons a second. Why'd you make that choice, right? Are you not proficient with the 2.5? It wasn't that, though. Organizationally, we failed, and all around, right? It seems like we drink the Kool-Aid, because at one point my engine was set up. I had a bumper line, 150 GPM, 1 3/4. First cross lay, 150 GPM, 1 3/4. Second cross lay, 150 GPM, 1 3/4. Third cross lay, 2.5 inch with a gated Y. So what am I going to connect to it? 150 GPM, 1 3/4.
Yeah.
Same thing on the back. So I have no ability to flow big water, right? And so when you're talking about pre-connecting Glendale loads, and all you're giving them is a choice between 1 3/4, you know what I mean? Then that's not a successful layout. That's an organizational, operational failure where we overlooked some things, right?
Yeah.
So I get a lot of pushback on the 2.5 too. At the time, like until we started teaching our class, I never saw the 2.5. It was punitive, right? But once we can flow it with
the 2.5 is for defensive fires,
right? And it's not, you get a foothold on that thing right away, and then you're winning, right? So I always say 1 3/4 rooms on fire. Your 2.5 is for commercial fires or residential floors on fire, right? And your deck gun is for buildings on fire. And, there's some, that can be interchanged, but when we talk about gallons per second, not gallons per minute, you're looking at, 5 gallons a second, a 5-gallon paint bucket out of your 2.5. So I get a lot of like, well, we don't have the manpower to do that. Yes, you do. We just need to train on your proficiency, right?
Right.
You absolutely, because I can do it solo, right? And I can certainly move that around 90-degree turns with 2 people easily with the right technique, right? And the right nozzle and hose package. And then I hear, we're going to run out of water. Well, no, you're not. You're going to run out of water if you pull the 1 3/4, because they say GPMs versus BTUs, although it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because you should be talking about energy, joules, right? But when you talk about you pull your 1 3/4 at 2.2 gallons or 2.5 gallons a second, it's not going to get that. But if you pull the 2.5, then it's going to work. You got to know your weapon selection, So once you teach your firefighters what weapon to pull and why, and your company officers the capabilities and limitations of those weapons, then they can make educated decisions of where they want to prioritize or deprioritize water supplies.
Okay, so here's the tough follow-up question. Why do we struggle with this?
I think I don't think people listen. They hear, did he just say don't lay a supply line? I never said that.
And the conversation stops.
And the conversation stops, right? Yeah. I never said that. It's back to your point. You need to teach your company officers and your firefighters to get a good size up. And that's your, at a firefighter level, that's your line length and location, right? Which line am I pulling them and why?
Yeah.
How long does this line need to be to achieve this objective, right? Because the pre-connect has killed the ability to estimate a stretch. In your academy, I guarantee you that line reaches every time they pull it. Right? So we're developing habits, right? Not thinking firefighters. So if you do your line location and your length of your hose, where am I pulling this to that's the most advantageous place to extinguish this fire? Is that a transitional attack? Is it interior? Is it around the back because that's where I need to make that attack? That's my firefighter size up. And my captain size up now changes. Once I give the firefighter the intent, right? Here's the intent of what these considerations are. My captain can now look back at the bigger picture, right? The infinite game, where I'm looking at my critical fireground factors. I'm managing my risk management plan so I can develop the IAP, which I can now get into my strategies, right? So that's what I want. That's the end game. I never said, get rid of the pistol grips on the nozzles. We don't need gated Ys. Don't lay a supply line. I never said that shit, right? But if you don't listen, right, or never pick up the phone and ask, then you're not going to get it. You're only going to hear rumors and be like, that's nonsense, right? Well, again, if you don't want me to use my tank water, stop putting water on the truck. Yeah. And how ridiculous does that sound?
Well, and it goes back to why, right? So I'm thinking about in Chicago in 1980, they put deck guns on and pre-connects. Mm-hmm. Why? Well, so that they could get water to the seat of the fire quickly when they first show up on scene. Let's lob some water up there so we can knock down the body of the fire and then make our ascent and then extinguish the fire fully. And, to me, the mark of a professional firefighter, one of them, there's a couple I would like to point to, but is the ability to extinguish fire quickly and to get people out of harm's way as quickly as possible.
For sure.
Like our objective is to our own ego, right? Diving through walls of fire, right? Like let's put the fire out.
Yep.
Right. You make the conditions better for everybody involved, for yourselves, for the building, and for the occupants. Yep. Right. The conditions get better.
Yeah. Fuck ass shit. That's the acronyms. Right. Front door under a minute. Charge. Yeah.
I've never heard that before. You caught me off guard.
Yeah. So it's front door under a minute, charged and kink free. Yeah. Right. That's your objective for your hose line. You want an aggressive suppression and search.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, you're going to come up with sudden heat-induced terror.
Yeah.
Period.
I love that.
Right?
I love that. So one of the things I hear you saying that I think is really interesting is that you have to be a thinking firefighter. And I think we put brawn over brains, right? But the 6 inches between your ears, you have to be aggressive in that space to make fast, smart, well-considered decisions. You're talking about the variables on the fireground, right? There's no absolutes.
For sure, right?
Because you have to look at all the different variables and make decisions that are driven by the variables on the fireground. If you say we show up on the fire and we always do X, you're going to be met. You're going to be successful some of the time,
right?
But there's going to be plenty of times when you are going to meet resistance with the incident because the fire gets a vote, right? Sure.
Yep, and I've been lying about what 6 inches is my whole life.
Yeah.
So but really, that's what it boils down to, right? Yeah. And when you don't have a full understanding of all of these concepts, right?
Yeah.
What your weapon selection, when to deprioritize or prioritize supply lines, where to attack the fire from the most advantageous position and understand that flow path and what that should look like if you're squirting your line into an exhaust, right? How to keep this under control, think outside the box with certain things, then shame on you.
Yeah.
You can do better.
Yeah.
There's a better way to do it.
So Chris, what other controversial topics do you have? What other things have you done to stir the crap?
That's largely it. The 2.5 was
enough.
Part of that. The deprioritizing the supply lines.
Yeah.
But specking apparatus is another one. Like I said, if your hose lines are too high, and you got to pull out a shelf, then you're delaying that fire attack for Mrs. Smith.
Yeah.
Right. And I understand we want to mitigate our cancer risk, right? I get that. I understand that we want to make stuff safer for us and operate on the fire ground. But there are some inherent risks with the job. And of course we need to minimize those. And that minimization comes through training and a complete understanding of the operating on emergency scenes.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but when that pendulum swings too far and we talk about, not being ready when we step off the rig, how long's Phoenix Fire had their packs out of their cabs?
Since the late 80s.
Before I got hired. So 30 years.
Yeah.
And arguably, and I'm not data informed. I don't use data driven. I'm data informed is what I'll say, but I'm not, because it's not collected. But when the Valley decided to go clean cap, was there any data that says Phoenix Fire's cancer rate is any different than anybody else's? Because you've had your packs out for 30 years.
Yeah.
Is their cancer rate any different? Is it lower? You're shaking your head.
Yeah,
right?
I don't.
You can't answer that.
I can't answer it, but I can't imagine it is.
Right. So
because I know too many people with cancer.
So are the packs the problem? Is my question.
And to be fair, the packs were pulled out for
different reasons.
Totally different reasons back in the day.
Back then, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, but are the packs the problem for this, or can we mitigate that risk a different way?
Yeah.
Because now, arguably,
the thing is important is the fact is we have to ask the question.
Right.
Right. Instead of just saying, make it so. Right. What's really happening and why is it happening?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's to me, I'm like, I used to get out already. You know what I mean? My firefighters get out masked up. All they need to do is click in. Are you teaching them to mask up with their gloves on? If not, because that's just a delay. Mm-hmm. So now I've got a delay in masking up. I've got a delay in packing up. I've got a delay with pulling the hose line because I got to pull a shelf out or my engineer's going to do it for me, pump operator. Do you have zippers on your turnouts versus the clips? Is that slower? All this is seconds off the time, and that pendulum is swinging, right? So can we mitigate our risk in a different way that doesn't impact the civilians we're sworn to protect? I don't have the answers. And I look at it because the data is not conclusive, because I'll look back at the last 10 years of civilian fire deaths. They're all about the same within 1,000, right? So, which is a lot, right? But what it doesn't tell me is, I know there's firefighter rescue survey and stuff, but could those injuries have been prevented with that pendulum swing the other way? Can we spec our apparatus different? Can we buy hose and nozzle packages that are more efficient for fire attack because we're fighting fire, not hose? If we understand what that nozzle reaction should be, there are necessary and unnecessary pressures, right? To buy a 75 PSI fog or 100 PSI fog, that's ludicrous, right? When I could do the same thing with 50 PSI and get more GPM, right? So why are we not looking at the entire package for a response model and just looking at those little finite things?
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know. I think it's, what do they say about firefighters, right? There's two things we hate: change and the way it is.
Yep.
And to make changes like that takes a lot of work, not only fiscally, right? Sometimes changing out equipment, et cetera, can be very expensive.
For sure.
And these are reasons, not excuses, right? These are just the way it is. And then organizational change, it's tough because now you've got a lot of people who have done it the way they've done it successfully for however many years. And now you want them to completely overhaul or reconsider the way they're doing business. That's tough. Those are some real challenges.
You asked me another thing that I made waves with. And so bringing in outside fire conferences, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we're so resistant to change. And like I said, this is a buffet. This isn't a regional training. And I think Valley Fire Chiefs need to wrap their head around this. This isn't regional. I'm bringing it in for people that traveled from Hawaii, right? People that traveled from all these different states. And yes, it might not fit our organization. That's okay. Don't take it. Don't take that part of the message. And if you see something that your guys want to bring back and you're like, absolutely not, we're not doing that. Right.
Well, when you're talking, hold on, let me frame it for you. You're talking about the Fire Nuggets conferences that you hold, right?
Yes. Yep. That's a big wave maker, right?
Yeah. So what are give me an example of some of the topics that you've offered over the years?
Oh man. So I brought in Peter Van Dorp from ISFSI, right? And he's talking about fire behavior. And this was 2014, 15. Brought in Mark Von Oppen and David Griffin about leadership and change in the fire service, right? Dr. David Griffin was the pump operator on the Charleston 9
Engine 11
event, right?
Yeah.
So great message. So I brought in both of them. I brought in the Smoke Coalition, so for cancer, and the protective equipment. I brought in Robin Zavotek from UL. I brought in Craig Weinshank from UL. I brought in Clark Lamping and Jimmy Davis from Vegas high-rise fires and mid-rise fires. I brought in Fit to Fight Fire. I brought in, I brought in Aaron Fields for the nozzle forward, Brian Brush for the 2.5 class. I brought in Steve Robertson for successful hose stretching, stretching through vehicles and apartment complexes and chain link fences.
So far, nothing sounds too controversial to me.
Right. The biggest one was, and the same thing happened at the Phoenix conference, is Brothers in Battle doing VES and searching off a hose line. I'm like, we do that. We VES'd my entire career. When I got hired, we had an MCS that was a 35-foot ladder stand to a third-story window with a victim removal, and we had to tie a IFSTA fire knot, like a bowline and remove the victim, right? That's VES. We just put a name to it, right? Yes, we can search off a hose line if we practice, right? How many times, honestly, in your career as a captain, you walked in and said, hey, there's the seat of the fire. I'm going to break off and do a quick search, right? You're off the hose line, and for us not to admit it is just silly.
Yeah. Well,
and,
I would submit to you that it's condition dependent.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's the point goes all the way back to size up and understanding your operational conditions.
Yep. And condition, and again, it's risk managed by competence. If you're more comfortable using your thermal imager as a tool to do that search, you are going to move around that limited visibility environment more comfortably. If you don't train with it, you're not going to be comfortable, right? So it's all of those things. So, but to go, we're not going to do that, or hey, I've got some heartache with that. That's okay, But understand, when I bring in these big conferences, it's not a regional training. This is not just for us.
Right.
This is a big picture overall. Yeah. So that's where it made waves.
When's your do you guys have a calendar coming up of more events coming down the pipeline?
Oh, so Fire Nuggets, we host events all the time. I only do them maybe once a year, once every other year in Phoenix. But I mean, we do 20 major conferences a year, and probably over 100 classes, well over 100 classes. Not to mention they have their podcast. We also do a virtual training for engine and truck company operations that, we're blessed here in the Valley. So with our training models, our regional, programs, dispatch, the way we do automatic aid, we are the gold standard of that model, right? Like, I didn't even know it was different anywhere else. But where we fail is, we're a little inbred, and our egos are in the way of understanding the outside influences. And this isn't about us. This isn't about Phoenix Fire or Mesa Fire, or any of the big entities. This is about making the fire service better and delivering an overall message that may be applicable to these other organizations, right? So that was part of that. And now to fast forward to your other question, AI, the fire service is going to pass me up, right? Augmented reality, AI using computer systems, and how we're going to train in the future, virtual reality is all going to be part of the fire service in the next 20 years. We're already working on a drone program. We already have a robotics program. You don't see some of that stuff elsewhere, right? Yeah. So again, imagine that if I took it over somewhere out east and they're like, what are you talking about? I don't want anything to do with that. And then 10 years from now, they're like, maybe I should have paid attention to that guy. Right. So it's an overall message in the fire service, and sky's the limit with that stuff.
It goes back to everything that we talk about here is individuals, as organizations, we have to be curious.
Yes.
Right. We have to go, what's going on out there? And how could what's changing, and how does that affect us? Right. Is there a way that this could help us be safer, more effective, be more fast on the fire ground? Like, what are the things that get in our way? We just have to be honest about that. Right. I think that's the big thing, is when someone brings an idea up, kind of the theme of this whole thing, right, is when somebody brings an idea up that makes you uncomfortable, don't get mad at the person for bringing up the idea. Get curious about your discomfort.
Right.
Right. Why are you uncomfortable with this different idea? And lean into it. So, all right, let me ask you a couple rapid fire questions. And the intent of these are short answer. So what's one thing that has surprised you about life?
Man, your best laid plans, always are going to change. So I don't know if I got one thing, but it's just, it's amazing how passionate you can get with something if you really believe in what you want to do. Man, I can't really come up with an answer, because there's just,
I think that's a good answer right there.
Yeah, so many different things that play into that. And like, I think it was Ronald Reagan that said it, and you don't, if you don't care who gets the credit, you can accomplish a lot more.
Well, my next question was going to be, what's your favorite piece of advice? And I think I just heard it right there.
Don't kiss your mom on your dad's birthday. So no. No. So
I have to unpack that one for a minute.
No, there's some bad advice, like don't squirt smoke. It's not my emergency. Those are terrible pieces of advice. You got to understand some of that. But the best piece of advice, I think, and I've always carried it with me, is my old RTO said, Chris, don't sweat the small things, and they're mostly small things.
Yeah. All right. I like it. All right. Last question. What does it mean to you to be fireground fit?
That starts at home. You can't go into your job. You got to be mentally and physically fit for the fireground. And when you have a happy home life and your kids are doing great and you're managing that great, then you can go to work and be more fireground fit. Then you can focus on what matters in your workplace, right? So start there. Start prioritizing family. And I got experience, right, through good judgment and bad judgment. So when you're happy with your home life and you're mentally fit, you can be mentally prepared to come to work, right? And then, of course, physical fitness and training are always part of that. That all plays into fireground fit. You've got to prepare to the evolving fireground, and that never stops. It doesn't stop in incident command. We are always developing our process, and it shouldn't stop at the firefighter level either. We have to understand our weapon selection. We have to understand, what the fire behavior is doing. We have to understand how our buildings are going to protect us or they're not going to protect us, and what the building's capabilities and limitations are. Once we have a fundamental understanding of all those and have a good home life, then we're fireground fit.
I love it. Well, Chris, where can people find Fire Nuggets?
firenuggets.com.
Oh, that's simple.
Yep. Firenuggets.
Are you guys on? Are you on Instagram? I'm sure you are. Right?
There's a little bit of Instagram stuff. That's part of the. I want to start using some AI to increase our social media platform, because again, we do hundreds of classes. We do the Boise Fire Symposium, we do the Bay Area Fire Symposium, we do the Mile High Fire Conference, the Pacific Northwest Fire Conference, and then tons of micro conferences.
So there's no reason you shouldn't be out training.
Right. No reason. And we've got, we're working more closely now with David Rhodes and FDIC Fire Engineering. So I think next year we'll have a bigger presence at FDIC.
Nice.
That's the biggest, fire conference in the country. And I rarely see people from Arizona there.
Yeah. I'll be there April 8th.
Are you? I'll be there the 9th. So
nice.
I'll
all right.
Introduce you to whoever you want. What are you taking there?
I haven't decided yet.
Yeah. So
it's my first time going, so I'm going in kind of open.
Oh, good.
Yep. Just want to see what's going on.
Good. Get into some of the workshops. There's a guy from Canada doing a EV underground.
Ooh, cool.
It's underground parking garage fires with EV in high-rise buildings as well.
Yeah.
Super intelligent guy. Get out of your box, right?
Yeah.
And so I see a lot of guys taking classes where they're comfortable. They know the material, if they're even there. But I'm like, hey man, go here.
Yeah.
Go open your eyes to something you may not have thought of.
Yeah. I love it.
So.
Well, Chris, thank you, man. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, man, no problem. Thanks for having me. It's been a minute since
we
started this journey.
It took us like 3 years to make this happen.
Right? Yeah,
right
that
on.
seems to be my theme. Yeah, but thanks for having me. I appreciate you.
Right on, brother.
So.
That's all we have for today, folks. If you are enjoying this podcast, get on over to Apple Podcasts, rate and review the podcast. It's good. It gets other people here to follow. If you have any comments or questions, shoot me an email at raingray@firegroundfitness.com. Most importantly, as you're listening to this podcast, take the lessons and the things that we talk about and find ways to improve your skills to become a more effective and more capable firefighter and professional on this job. Keep getting after it, my friends. Get some.